A hungry girl walks into a luxury restaurant with a simple request and unknowingly sparks a flame that will shake secrets, memories, and lifelong certainties. The winter afternoon in Boston presented that characteristic overcast sky, with the cold air causing pedestrians to quicken their pace through the streets of Beacon Hill. The Horizon Gourmet restaurant occupied a renovated historic mansion, maintaining the original facade from the last century, but with an interior that exuded modernity and sophistication. It was a deliberate contrast, as the owner, Benjamin Matthews, a 70-year-old gentleman who had built a small culinary empire in the Massachusetts capital, liked to emphasize. In the main dining room, the impeccably clean windows revealed a calculatedly luxurious environment. Tables covered with starched white tablecloths, minimalist floral arrangements in crystal vases, and a soft piano soundtrack that filled the air like a perfumed cloud. The waiters, all uniformed with white gloves, moved with the precision of a choreography rehearsed thousands of times, serving finely assembled dishes that looked more like ephemeral works of art. Supervising everything with eagle eyes was Thomas Richardson, the manager who had been commanding this silent orchestra for more than a decade. Tall, thin, with carefully trimmed grey hair and always erect posture, he personified the discretion that the restaurant promised to its clientele, influential politicians, businessmen, and celebrities who sought refuge from public harassment. "Table 3, Adam. The secretary prefers the wine served before the main course," Thomas instructed in a low voice as he passed by the restaurant's most senior waiter, a middle-aged man with an impeccable moustache who promptly nodded. As he checked the minute details of the operation, Thomas carried with him that expression of seriousness that never left his face, not even when he smiled at customers. It was as if an invisible weight was permanently installed on his shoulders. Anyone who observed him carefully would notice that behind that impeccable professional facade was a man marked by memories that he struggled to keep locked in some compartment of his mind. On that particular afternoon, while organizing the climate-controlled wine cellar, he was interrupted by Jessica, the youngest kitchen assistant, who entered the reserved area with wide eyes. "Mr. Thomas, there's a child trying to come in through the back door," she said, twisting her apron between her fingers. "A child?" His eyebrow raised in question. "Must be some customer's child who got lost. I'll check." Thomas crossed the kitchen with quick steps, passing by Chef Michael, who shouted precise orders to his team, sweat running down his forehead as he finished a mushroom risotto that was the house specialty. The intense noise of stoves, pans, and voices contrasted dramatically with the calculated silence of the dining room, as if they were two completely different worlds, separated only by a swinging door. Upon reaching the side door that led to the alley, Thomas encountered a scene that momentarily froze him. A small girl, who couldn't have been more than 7 years old, was standing there. Her dark hair was tangled, her clothes, a t-shirt too big for her thin body, seemed not to have been washed for days. But what really impacted him were her eyes, large, dark, and with a determination that seemed displaced in someone so young. "What do you want, little girl?" he asked, keeping his voice neutral, professional. "I want to eat," she responded without hesitation. "I can wash dishes." That answer, so direct and unexpected, hit Thomas like a punch to the stomach. For a fleeting instant, a flash of memory transported him to another time, another city, where he himself had been a hungry child, offering work in exchange for food. The memory was so vivid that he almost smelled the fresh bread from the bakery where he had begged for an opportunity decades ago. "What's your name?" he asked, his voice softening almost imperceptibly. "Lily," she answered, maintaining eye contact. Thomas looked to the sides, making sure that no customer could see this scene from the street. The rules were clear. Horizon Gourmet maintained an impeccable image, and that included keeping distance from anything that might disturb the experience of its exclusive clientele. But something about that girl prevented him from simply sending her away. "Come in," he finally said, opening the door wider. "But stay in the pantry area. Nobody can see you in the dining room, understand?" Lily nodded, quickly entering before he could change his mind. Thomas led her to a small space adjacent to the kitchen, where the staff had their meals. The place was empty at that hour. "Wait here," he instructed, and headed to the kitchen. Minutes later, he returned with a plate containing rice, beans, and a generous piece of chicken. The staff meal, very different from the elaborate dishes served to customers. Lily observed the food for a second, before starting to eat with controlled voracity. She didn't seem desperate, just determined, as if she knew exactly how much she needed to eat to move forward. "Where are your parents?" Thomas asked, remaining standing. She swallowed a mouthful before answering, "My mom is working. My dad left." There was something about the way she said it, without self-pity, just stating facts, that continued to resonate with something deep inside Thomas. It was like looking at a mirror distorted by time. "And where do you live?" "Near the train tracks," she answered vaguely, continuing to eat. Thomas was called back to the dining room to resolve a situation with a customer dissatisfied with the doneness of the meat. When he returned to the pantry, Lily had already finished eating and was sitting in silence, hands in her lap, waiting. "You said you wanted to wash dishes," he commented, observing her with curiosity. "Yes, sir. Not needed today, but if you want to come back tomorrow, we can arrange something for you to do." Her eyes lit up briefly before returning to a serious expression. "What time?" "After lunch, 2 o'clock. Come through the same door." Lily nodded, rising with an almost adult dignity. "Thank you for the food." When she left, Thomas remained standing for a few minutes, absorbed in thought. Something had changed within him during that brief encounter, as if a long locked door had been cracked open, letting escape fragments of memories and feelings that he supposed were buried by time and routine. "Any problem, Thomas?" Adam's voice brought him back to reality. "No, none," he answered automatically, resuming his usual posture. Table 12 asked for the check. The rest of the afternoon followed its predictable course. Thomas went back to being the efficient and discreet manager, solving small crises, supervising the service, ensuring that everything functioned like the well-oiled mechanism he had helped build. But something had been planted that day, a seed of change that was beginning to germinate silently. At the end of the shift, while checking the cash register closing, he found himself thinking of Lily. He wondered if she would really return the next day, or if that encounter had been just an isolated episode. A part of him, the practical and rational part that governed his life, hoped she wouldn't return, that the routine could continue unchanged. But another part, the one that had awakened during the brief encounter, secretly awaited the girl's return. When he left the restaurant, it was already past midnight. The Boston sky was clear now, revealing a crescent moon and some stars that managed to shine despite the city lights. The cold night air made him press his coat against his body as he walked to the bus stop. His small, organized apartment awaited him, a space as meticulously arranged as his external life, but equally empty of real connections. That night, Thomas dreamed of his past for the first time in many years. In his dream, he was again the thin boy with frightened eyes who wandered the streets of a distant city, looking for crumbs of kindness in a world that seemed built to reject him. The next day dawned with a fine drizzle that seemed more like a mist suspended in the air. Thomas awoke even before the alarm went off, with fragments of the dream still reverberating in his mind. It had been years since he had allowed himself to revisit those memories, carefully archived in a distant part of his consciousness. During his solitary breakfast in his meticulously organized apartment, he caught himself wondering if Lily would really appear. He arrived at the restaurant earlier than usual. Horizon Gourmet opened only for lunch, but preparation began hours before, with suppliers delivering fresh products and the kitchen team starting preparations for the elaborate dishes on the menu. "You're up early today, Thomas?" commented Michael, the chef, while supervising the delivery of fresh fish. "I needed to get ahead on some things," he responded vaguely, heading to his small office at the back of the establishment. Throughout the morning, as much as he tried to focus on spreadsheets and organizing the wine cellar, his thoughts returned to the girl with determined eyes. He was almost certain she wouldn't return. Street children rarely kept commitments. He knew that from his own experience. Life on the streets was too unpredictable to allow any kind of routine. Lunch proceeded with the usual efficiency. The restaurant filled up as always on Thursdays, with executives discussing business in low voices and ladies of Boston high society commenting on charitable events between bites of gourmet salad. Thomas circulated among the tables with his characteristic discretion, solving small problems before customers even realized something was wrong. When the clock struck 2 in the afternoon, the movement had already diminished considerably. Some latecomers were still finishing their desserts, while the team was starting preparation for dinner. Thomas casually headed to the side door, as if to check something in the alley. He opened it and looked outside, feeling a pang of disappointment at not seeing anyone. "She's not coming," he muttered to himself, a mixture of relief and disappointment in his voice. He was about to close the door when he spotted the small figure turning the corner of the alley. Lily walked with determined steps, still wearing the same oversized t-shirt, but she had tried to fix her hair, tying it in an awkward ponytail. Upon seeing him, she quickened her pace. "Good afternoon, sir," she said formally upon reaching the door, as if reproducing something she had heard adults say. "Good afternoon, Lily," he replied, surprised by her punctuality. "Come, enter." He led her again to the staff pantry, noting that she observed everything around her with attentive eyes, absorbing every detail. There was something adult about that child, a maturity forced by circumstances that Thomas knew all too well. "Have you had lunch?" he asked, though he already knew the answer. She hesitated for a moment before answering honestly. "No, sir. I'll get something for you to eat before you start." When he returned with a plate of food, he found Lily exactly where he had left her, sitting upright in the chair, hands in her lap, as if she feared touching anything around her. "Eat first, then you can help me with some simple tasks." As she ate, Thomas observed her discreetly. Questions accumulated in his mind. Where did she sleep? How did she survive on the streets? Why wasn't she in school? But something prevented him from interrogating her. Perhaps it was the silent recognition of a dignity that he himself had struggled to maintain in similar circumstances. "I'm finished," announced Lily, carefully aligning the cutlery beside the empty plate. "All right, you can help me organize this cabinet," he said, pointing to a small storage area where they kept cleaning items and less-used utensils. "I need you to separate the dish towels from the floor cloths." It was a simple task, but it would keep the girl busy and away from the eyes of customers and part of the staff. While she worked meticulously, Thomas alternated between his responsibilities in the dining room and brief checks in the pantry. It was during one of these checks that Adam, the oldest waiter, approached him with a worried expression. "Thomas, what is that girl doing here again?" he asked in a low voice, casting a glance in Lily's direction, who was concentrated on her task. "You know that Mr. Benjamin wouldn't approve of this. The restaurant has an image to uphold." "She's just helping me with some tasks," Thomas replied, maintaining a neutral tone. "She stays only in the pantry, away from customers." "And if someone from the health department shows up? Or worse, if some important customer sees her? Just imagine the scandal." "Horizon Gourmet exploits child labor," Adam dramatized, making broad gestures with his hands. "Nobody is exploiting anyone," Thomas retorted, feeling a growing irritation. "She needed help, and I'm giving what I can. Since when did you become a social worker? I've never seen you concerned with this sort of thing before." The observation hit Thomas like a direct blow. It was true. During all the years he had worked there, he had always maintained a safe distance from the difficult stories that occasionally crossed his path. Customers leaving huge tips for waiters who mentioned difficulties, suppliers who clearly struggled to keep their small businesses running, cleaning ladies who worked in 3 different places to support large families. He observed everything with a carefully cultivated neutrality. "She reminds me of someone," was all he said before walking away, leaving Adam with a confused expression. The rest of the afternoon passed without incident. Lily finished the task assigned to her and received other small activities, polishing already clean cutlery, organizing napkins, sorting plastic container lids. She executed each task with an unusual concentration for her age, as if each small job were of extreme importance. At the end of the day, when the movement began to increase again for dinner, Thomas knew he needed to send her away. The complete staff would be present, including Mr. Benjamin, who occasionally appeared to dine with influential friends. "Lily, you worked well today," he said, handing her a small package with food he had discreetly set aside. "But now you need to go." She took the package without showing surprise, as if she already expected that moment. "Can I come back tomorrow?" The question caught him by surprise. He knew he should say no, end that situation before it became even more complicated. The restaurant was no place for a street child, no matter how polite and hard-working she was. "Yes," he answered, contradicting the voice of reason in his head, "but don't come during lunch or dinner time. Come at 4 in the afternoon when we are less busy." A small smile, the first he had seen, briefly illuminated Lily's face before she resumed her serious expression. "Thank you, Mr. Thomas." She left through the same side door, quickly disappearing into the alley. Thomas stood watching for a few moments, a strange feeling growing in his chest, something between concern and a kind of satisfaction he hadn't felt in a long time. In the days that followed, Lily became a constant presence at the restaurant. She always appeared at the agreed time, performed small tasks, and received in return meals and, occasionally, clothes that Thomas managed to get from employees who had children. He avoided asking too many questions, and she voluntarily offered little information. It was a silent agreement that worked for both. The kitchen team gradually got used to her presence. Jessica, the youngest assistant, began to teach her small culinary tricks when business was slow. Even the temperamental chef Michael occasionally allowed her to watch while he prepared elaborate sauces, explaining each step as if he were giving a private lesson. Only Adam maintained his disapproval, casting disapproving looks whenever he crossed paths with the girl. "This is still going to cause problems," he frequently muttered when passing by Thomas. And indeed, the problem arose on a rainy Thursday, when Mr. Benjamin appeared unexpectedly at the restaurant outside his usual hours. Thomas was in the office checking the wine inventory when Jessica entered hurriedly. "Mr. Thomas, the boss is here, and Lily is in the kitchen helping the chef sort herbs." He stood up immediately, his heart racing. "Take her to the back pantry and ask her to stay there until I call." But it was too late. Upon reaching the kitchen, he found Mr. Benjamin, an imposing gentleman with white hair and an impeccable suit, standing at the entrance, observing with an indecipherable expression while Lily meticulously organized small bunches of fresh herbs under the chef's supervision. "Thomas," Benjamin called upon seeing him, his deep voice echoing in the suddenly silent kitchen. "Who is this child? And what is she doing in my kitchen?" Time seemed to freeze. All the staff present interrupted their activities, nervous glances alternating between the owner and the manager. Lily remained motionless, eyes lowered, as if trying to become invisible. "Mr. Benjamin," Thomas began, keeping his voice firm despite his nervousness. "This is Lily. She has been helping me with small tasks over the past few days. And since when do we hire children to work at Horizon?" The question, although made in a calm tone, carried an evident reproach. "We haven't officially hired her, she just—" "In my office now," Benjamin cut him off, turning on his heels and leaving the kitchen. Thomas gave Lily a reassuring look before following his boss. He knew that moment could mean the end of his career at the restaurant, meticulously built over more than a decade. Still, an unexpected certainty grew within him. He did not regret having helped the girl, regardless of the consequences he would now have to face. Benjamin Matthews' office was a space that perfectly reflected the personality of its owner. Elegant without being ostentatious, traditional without seeming antiquated. A solid wood desk dominated the environment, flanked by shelves filled with books on gastronomy, wines, and administration. The walls displayed framed photographs of the restaurant over the years, as well as Benjamin, alongside famous personalities who had frequented the establishment. "Close the door," instructed the owner, sitting in his leather armchair while indicating the chair in front for Thomas. A heavy silence settled in the environment for a few moments. Thomas maintained an upright posture, prepared to defend his actions, but also aware that he had transgressed implicit rules of the establishment. "How long has this girl been frequenting the restaurant?" Benjamin finally asked, his tone surprisingly calm. "About 3 weeks, sir." "And what exactly led you to bring a street child to work in an establishment like ours?" Thomas took a deep breath, carefully choosing his words. "She appeared one day, asking for food in exchange for work. I thought I could help her with small tasks, keeping her away from customer areas. She is extremely responsible and careful for her age. You know that this violates several norms, not only of the restaurant but also labor laws," pondered Benjamin, interlacing his fingers on the desk. "Child labor is a crime, Thomas, regardless of good intentions. I don't consider her an employee, Mr. Benjamin. I'm just offering a safe place for a few hours of the day with adequate food." "And where does she live? Who are her guardians? Did you verify any of this information?" The questions hit Thomas like well-aimed arrows. The truth was that he had deliberately avoided investigating much about Lily's life, perhaps fearing discovering an even more difficult reality than he imagined. "She mentioned a mother who works but didn't go into details," he admitted, feeling the weight of his own negligence. "She said she lives near the train tracks." Benjamin sighed, running his hand through his perfectly combed white hair. "Thomas, how long have you worked for me?" 12 years. 13, sir. In all that time, I've never seen you break protocols or make decisions that could compromise the restaurant. You've always been the model of professionalism that I demand from all employees." He paused, observing the manager attentively. What's different about this girl? The question caught Thomas off guard. It was something he himself had been questioning in recent weeks, without reaching a clear answer. Why did he care so much about Lily when he had spent years ignoring other equally difficult stories? "She reminds me of myself," he finally confessed, the words coming out with difficulty. "When I was approximately her age, I went through a similar situation. If it weren't for someone who extended a hand to me at that time, I probably wouldn't be here today." Benjamin's face softened slightly, an expression of understanding replacing the initial severity. "You've never mentioned this before." "It's not something I'm proud of or that I consider relevant to my work," Thomas replied, briefly averting his gaze. "I managed to overcome that phase of my life and move on." "Except that you haven't completely overcome it, have you? Otherwise you wouldn't be reliving your past through this girl." The observation hit home. Thomas felt a lump in his throat, an emotion he hadn't experienced in years threatening to break the carefully constructed barrier around his feelings. "Maybe you're right," he admitted with difficulty. Benjamin leaned back in his chair, observing the manager for a few moments before continuing. "I cannot allow a child to continue working here, Thomas. You know that as well as I do. The risks are many, not only legal but also for the girl herself." "I understand, sir. However," continued the owner, leaning forward, "I also cannot ignore the fact that you, in 13 years of impeccable service, have never asked me for anything personal. So I propose a middle ground. Find this girl's mother. Discover the true family situation. If they really need help, we can think of something that doesn't involve having a child working illegally in our establishment." Thomas felt a mixture of relief and apprehension. The proposal was reasonable, but it meant confronting realities that he might prefer to keep at a distance. "Thank you, Mr. Benjamin. I'll talk to Lily today." "Good. And Thomas," he added, when the manager was already getting up, "sometimes helping someone means more than offering food and temporary shelter. It means facing the roots of the problem." Benjamin's words accompanied him as he returned to the kitchen, where he found Lily sitting in a corner, apparently absorbed in folding napkins, but with tense shoulders revealing her apprehension. "Everything is fine," he said as he approached, noticing how she immediately relaxed. "But we need to talk about some things." He led her to the staff pantry, now empty in the interval between lunch and dinner. Lily sat on the edge of the chair as she always did, her hands disciplinedly crossed on her lap. "Lily, I need to meet your mother," Thomas said directly. "I can't continue helping you without talking to her first." A flash of panic crossed the girl's eyes, so fast it almost went unnoticed. "Why? Did I do something wrong?" "No, not at all. You've been great. But there are rules about children working, even if it's just helping as you've been doing. I need your mother's authorization." Lily lowered her eyes, contemplating her options. Thomas could almost see the gears of her childish mind working, calculating risks and possibilities. "She works a lot," she finally said. "Leaves early and returns late. Sometimes doesn't return for days." The information fell like a stone in Thomas's stomach. The situation seemed even more complicated than he had imagined. "Where do you live exactly?" "Maybe I can visit her when she's home." Lily hesitated again, biting her lower lip. "We don't have a home right now. We're staying at a place near the train tracks. There are other people too." "An irregular occupation," Thomas deduced. It wasn't uncommon in certain areas of the city, especially close to the railway. Entire families living in precarious conditions, often without access to basic services. "I understand. And what is your mother's name? Where does she work?" "Nancy. She cleans houses, different places each day. A daily worker without fixed employment. The typical situation of someone living in informality, at the mercy of work availability, and without any guarantee or labor rights." "Lily," said Thomas, softening his voice, "I'll be honest with you. I can't let you continue coming here without talking to your mother first, but I really want to help both of you." The girl's eyes filled with tears, although she visibly fought to contain them. "She'll be angry. I left without permission. She doesn't know I come here." The confession surprised Thomas. He had assumed that the mother was aware of her daughter's activities, perhaps even encouraging her to seek food where she could. "Did you run away from home?" "Not exactly," she replied, quickly wiping away a tear that escaped. "We argued. She said maybe I would be better off with another family, that she couldn't take care of me properly anymore. So I went out to look for food and didn't return that day. Then I was ashamed." Thomas's heart tightened. An overwhelmed mother, probably at the limit of her strength, saying things she didn't really mean during a moment of despair. A child literally interpreting words said in the heat of emotion. "Your mother must be very worried, Lily. I need you to take me to her today." "But what if she's really angry? What if she doesn't want me anymore? I'm sure she misses you." Mothers sometimes say things they don't mean when they're under a lot of pressure. The girl was silent for a few moments, processing the information. "She should be at the camp now. Today is laundry day at the river. Can I accompany you there after my shift?" After more hesitation, Lily agreed with a nod. The rest of the afternoon passed with Thomas divided between his responsibilities at the restaurant and apprehension about the meeting to come. He delegated some tasks to Adam, vaguely explaining that he would need to leave earlier for a personal matter. At 6 in the evening, when the dinner movement was beginning to increase, Thomas and Lily left the restaurant. He had changed from his uniform into casual clothes, jeans and a simple shirt, so as not to draw attention in the place where they were headed. They walked for about 20 minutes, leaving behind the well-maintained streets of the upscale neighborhood and entering progressively simpler areas of the city. Lily walked in front, guiding him with the confidence of someone who knows every corner and alley. Eventually they came close to the railway line, where a small community had established itself in improvised shacks. "It's there," indicated Lily, pointing to a cluster of structures made of various materials, wood, tarpaulin, metal sheets. As they approached, Thomas observed the environment with a mixture of discomfort and familiarity. Children running between the shacks, women hanging clothes on improvised clotheslines, men fixing precarious roofs or talking in small groups. A reality that he knew well, although he had long left it behind. "Lily!" The female voice cut through the air even before they could approach further. A thin woman, approximately 30 years old, dark hair tied in an awkward bun and deep eye bags, ran toward them. Her face reflected an explosive mixture of emotions: relief, anger, fear, joy. "Mom," muttered Lily, suddenly shy. Nancy reached her daughter in seconds, kneeling to hug her tightly before holding her by the shoulders, examining her from top to bottom, as if checking if she was whole. "Where have you been all this time? I thought the worst had happened. I looked everywhere, even at the police station." The words came out jumbled, choked with emotion. "I'm sorry, Mom," replied Lily, eyes lowered. Only then did Nancy seem to notice Thomas's presence. Her gaze immediately became suspicious, protectively pulling her daughter closer. "Who are you? What do you want with my daughter?" "My name is Thomas Richardson. I'm the manager of Horizon Gourmet Restaurant," he introduced himself formally, maintaining a respectful distance. "Lily has been appearing there in recent weeks. I came to bring her back and talk to you if possible." Nancy's face alternated between confusion and suspicion. Horizon Gourmet, that fancy restaurant in Beacon Hill. What would my daughter be doing there? "She appeared asking for food in exchange for small jobs," explained Thomas. "I've been allowing her to help me with simple tasks and offering meals in return." Nancy's expression hardened. "Are you telling me you exploited the work of my 7-year-old daughter?" "No, ma'am. I just offered a safe place and food while she was away from home. I came personally to bring her back and check if I could help in any way." Nancy studied him for a few moments, as if trying to determine his true intentions. Around them, some neighbors began to observe the scene with curiosity. "Can we talk in a more private place?" suggested Thomas, noticing the looks. After a moment of hesitation, Nancy nodded. "Let's go to our shack. It's not much, but at least we can talk without an audience." As he followed mother and daughter among the improvised structures, Thomas felt a strange sense of déjà vu. Somehow he was returning to a past he thought he had definitely left behind, and, surprisingly, he felt not only discomfort. There was also a kind of recognition, as if he were finally facing a part of himself that he had ignored for too long. Nancy's and Lily's shack was surprisingly organized, considering the circumstances. A single space of approximately 12 square meters, informally divided by a curtain hung on a clothesline. On one side, two thin mattresses on the floor covered with clean sheets, although visibly worn. On the other, a small area that functioned as a kitchen, with a gas cooker, some pans carefully stacked, and a plastic box that served as a cabinet for the few supplies. "Sit down," offered Nancy, indicating one of the two mismatched chairs next to an improvised table made with crates. "Lily, go get water for us." The girl left quickly, apparently relieved to momentarily escape the conversation that would follow. Nancy waited until her daughter was out of earshot, before turning her attention to Thomas. "So you're the manager of that famous restaurant," she commented, sitting across from him. There was a mixture of respect and distrust in her tone. "What exactly was my daughter doing there?" "Small tasks, actually," he replied, carefully choosing his words. "Organizing napkins, polishing already clean cutlery, sorting herbs. Nothing dangerous or exhausting. She is incredibly methodical for her age." A slight smile, the first since they had met, briefly softened Nancy's tired features. "She's always been like that. Since she was little, she arranges her things like an adult. Sometimes I forget she's only 7 years old. Lily told me that you had a discussion. That's why she didn't return home." Nancy's face hardened again, a shadow of guilt passing through her eyes. "She told you that? What else did she say?" "Just that you mentioned she might be better off with another family, that you couldn't take care of her properly anymore." Nancy closed her eyes for an instant, as if the memory of those words caused physical pain. "I shouldn't have said that." "It was a moment of desperation," she admitted, her voice choked. "We had been evicted from the last place where we lived. I had lost 2 days of work looking for a place to stay, which meant less money for food. Lily was hungry, asking when we could buy bread, and I simply broke." Thomas nodded, perfectly understanding that kind of pressure, the constant weight of daily survival, the overwhelming responsibility of providing the basics, the permanent fear of tomorrow. "I'm not here to judge," he said softly. "I came because I care about Lily and wanted to make sure she was okay." Nancy studied him for a few moments, as if trying to decipher his true intentions. "Why do you care so much?" "People like you usually prefer not to see people like us." The direct question caught Thomas off guard, though it was perfectly valid. Why, after years of ignoring similar stories, had this one touched something so deep within him? "Because I used to be like Lily," he confessed, the words coming out before he could censor them. "At 8 years old, after my mother got sick, I spent almost a year living on the streets of Chicago, until a baker allowed me to sleep in the back of the bakery in exchange for small services. He and his wife ended up taking me in completely when my mother didn't make it." He was sharing something he rarely mentioned, not even to close people. Not that he had many of those in his solitary life. It was a part of his history that he had carefully isolated, as if it belonged to another person. At that moment, Lily returned, carefully carrying a pitcher with water and 3 plastic cups. She served Thomas first, then her mother, finally serving herself, all with a formality that would be comical in any other child her age. "Thank you, Lily," said Thomas, smiling at her. "Lily, sweetheart," intervened Nancy, "can you get those cookies that Mrs. Celeste gave us yesterday? They're stored under the bed." When the girl moved away again, Nancy resumed the conversation, her expression now softer. "I'm sorry for what you went through," she said with sincerity, "and I thank you for taking care of Lily these days. I really looked everywhere but never imagined she would be in a fine restaurant." "She's a special girl," commented Thomas, "very intelligent and observant. I'm sure that with the right opportunities, she can have a bright future." "Opportunities," repeated Nancy with a tired sigh. "That's what's most lacking for people like us. It's not a lack of will or effort. I've been working since I was 13, never afraid of hard work. But when you don't have a fixed address, when you don't have education, when you don't have someone to take care of your children while you work, everything becomes much more difficult." Thomas nodded, recognizing the truth in those words. His own trajectory had been marked by exceptional circumstances, the generosity of a couple who took him in, access to education that would normally be out of his reach, opportunities that arose at crucial moments. "May I ask about Lily's father?" Nancy's expression immediately hardened. "Roger. He worked in construction when we met. At the beginning, he seemed like a good man. Then he started drinking too much, becoming verbally aggressive. He never hit me or Lily, but the fear was always there. 6 months ago, after a particularly ugly argument, He left and didn't return. He shows up from time to time, usually when he needs money. Lily returned with a package of cookies, interrupting the conversation. She placed it on the table and sat in silence, attentively observing the adults. "Lily told me you work as a house cleaner," commented Thomas, slightly changing the subject. "When I can," confirmed Nancy. 3, sometimes 4 days a week in different houses. It's not easy to get fixed clients when you don't have a phone for contact and your address changes constantly. Thomas reflected for a few moments. An idea was beginning to form in his mind, fueled by the conversation with Benjamin earlier. "Mrs. Nancy, the restaurant where I work needs someone for cleaning services, especially in the morning before we open for lunch. It would be a formal job, with all benefits." Nancy's eyes widened in surprise, a mixture of hope and distrust in her gaze. "Are you offering me a job? Why? Out of pity?" "Not out of pity," Thomas replied firmly. "Because we really need someone. And after seeing how organized and meticulous Lily is, I imagine she learned that from someone." A slight blush colored Nancy's cheeks, who lowered her gaze, visibly moved by the indirect compliment. "Besides," he continued, "there's a small room in the back of the restaurant. It was used for storage but can be easily adapted as temporary housing. It's not big, but certainly better than—" He made a vague gesture, indicating the shack around them. "I can't accept all this," Nancy protested weakly. "It seems like too much charity." "It's not charity, it's a fair exchange. You gain a formal job that you desperately need, and we gain an employee who I'm sure will be exemplary." He paused before adding, "As for Lily, she could stay at the restaurant during your work hours and attend school in the other period. There's a public school 2 blocks from the establishment." Lily, who until then had been observing silently, couldn't contain a small, hopeful smile. The prospect of a safe roof, regular food, and the possibility of returning to school was evidently appealing to the girl who had demonstrated so much maturity and resilience. "Would your boss approve all this?" questioned Nancy, still hesitant. "It was his idea," Thomas partially lied. "Benjamin had suggested finding a solution, although he hadn't specified exactly what. He was impressed with Lily's story and suggested we help you in a more concrete way." Nancy remained silent for a few moments, clearly processing the proposal. It was an opportunity that would completely change the trajectory of her life and her daughter's. A stable job, housing, the chance to rebuild some dignity. When would I start?" she finally asked, her trembling voice betraying the contained emotion. "Tomorrow itself, if you can. We can handle the paperwork in the coming days. The most important thing is that you and Lily have a safe place to stay as soon as possible." Tears began to stream down Nancy's face, although she tried to contain them, especially in the presence of her daughter. Years of daily struggle, of closed doors, of repeatedly frustrated hopes, had taught her to distrust miraculous solutions. However, something in Thomas's sincerity made her believe that, this time, the change could be real. "Why are you doing this?" she asked one last time, drying the tears with the backs of her hands. "You barely know us." Thomas smiled softly, observing mother and daughter, so similar in their silent determination, in the dignity they maintained despite adverse circumstances. "Because someone did the same for me when I needed it most. And because sometimes all we need is a single opportunity to change the course of our lives." The next day at 6 in the morning, Thomas waited at the side door of Horizon Gourmet restaurant. He had arrived earlier than usual, after spending much of the night adapting the small storage room at the back of the establishment. He removed boxes and rarely used utensils, meticulously cleaned the space, installed a curtain to create a minimal divider, and arranged 2 simple beds he had bought at the last minute. It wasn't luxurious, far from it, but it offered dignity and safety, as well as access to a complete bathroom that was normally used only by staff. In a corner, he had set aside some basic hygiene products and clean towels. Small gestures that he knew from personal experience could mean a lot to someone coming from a precarious situation. Precisely at the agreed time, he spotted Nancy and Lily approaching. They carried only 1 plastic bag each, all their possessions in the world. The scene instantly transported him to his own past, to the day he held Mrs. Carmen's hand, the baker's wife, while she guided him to the small room above the bakery that would be his new home. "Good morning," he greeted, opening the door wider for them to enter. "Welcome to Horizon Gourmet." Nancy seemed nervous, repeatedly smoothing the only outfit she considered suitable for such an environment. Jeans without tears and a simple blue blouse, albeit clean. Lily, on the other hand, displayed that serene confidence that Thomas had already noticed before, observing everything around her with attentive and curious eyes. "I'll show you where you'll stay," he said, guiding them through the still empty kitchen. The staff would only arrive an hour later, to the space in the back. Upon seeing the improvised room, Nancy brought her hand to her mouth, visibly moved. It wasn't much in the eyes of any ordinary person, but for someone coming from an improvised shack by the railroad tracks, it represented unimaginable comfort. "It's perfect," she murmured, unable to contain the tears. "I don't know how to thank you." "By doing good work," Thomas replied simply. "From today you have a chance to start over. The rest depends on you." As he observed mother and daughter settling into the small space, he felt a strange sense of completeness, as if a cycle were closing, as if he were finally returning the kindness he had received so many years ago. "I'll leave you to get organized," he said, heading to the door. "In an hour we'll begin preparation for lunch. Nancy, I'll introduce you to the team and explain your duties." "I'll be ready," she assured, determination evident in her gaze. Thomas nodded and left, gently closing the door behind him. As he walked back to his office, he realized that something had changed within him. The carefully constructed barrier around his past was beginning to come apart, and instead of the pain he had always feared finding, there was a strange sense of liberation. That morning, when the team began to arrive, Thomas introduced Nancy as the new employee responsible for cleaning. He briefly explained that she and her daughter were going through temporary difficulties and would be staying in the former storage room for some time. Most employees accepted the news with normalcy. Staff turnover was common in restaurants, and many had faced their own financial difficulties in the past. Only Adam, the oldest waiter, showed some discomfort, approaching Thomas when they were alone. "First the girl, now the mother. What's happening to you, Thomas? I've never seen you so involved with other people's problems." "Maybe it's time to change that," he replied simply, ending the conversation. Throughout the day, he discreetly observed how Nancy dedicated herself to the assigned tasks with impressive efficiency. She cleaned each surface meticulously, paying attention to details that many would ignore, moving with a discretion that seemed natural. Lily, in turn, remained in the small room most of the time, drawing on sheets that Jessica had given her, occasionally helping her mother with simple tasks. At the end of that first day, when the restaurant closed after dinner, Thomas found Nancy in the staff pantry, apparently exhausted, but with a gleam in her eyes that wasn't there in the morning. "How was your first day?" he asked, sitting across from her. "Better than I could have imagined," she answered honestly. "Everyone was kind, even that older waiter who seemed suspicious at the beginning. And Lily, I've never seen her so happy. She's already talking about going back to school." Thomas smiled, feeling a satisfaction that went far beyond his professional role. In just one day, he had witnessed the beginning of a transformation, not only in Nancy and Lily's lives, but also in his own carefully controlled and emotionally distant existence. "Tomorrow we'll go to the public school to check on Lily's enrollment," he informed. "And at the end of the week I'll talk to Mr. Benjamin about your formal contract." "Thomas," called Nancy, hesitant, "I'm afraid it's too good to be true. That something will go wrong, as always happens." He perfectly understood that fear, the constant expectation of the next blow from fate, the inability to simply accept something good without expecting it to be snatched away at any moment. "It's normal to feel that," he said gently. "But sometimes, Nancy, things really do change for the better. And this is one of those times. Trust the process." That night, upon returning to his silent and organized apartment, Thomas sat on the edge of the bed, reflective. For years, he had built a life based on predictability and emotional distancing, an effective defense mechanism against the uncertainties that had marked his childhood. Now suddenly he was allowing himself to get involved, to risk, to feel. It was frightening and liberating at the same time, like crossing a door that had always been there, but that he had never dared to open. The following weeks brought a new routine to Horizon Gourmet Restaurant. Nancy quickly established herself as an exemplary employee. Her dedication and care making even the most skeptical team members accept her as an integral part of the establishment. Thomas had formalized her hiring, with full support from Benjamin, who showed satisfaction at seeing the positive impact that decision had caused not only in the woman's and her daughter's lives, but also in the dynamics of the restaurant itself. Lily, in turn, had started attending Lincoln Elementary School, 2 blocks from the restaurant. For the first time in almost a year, she had a stable routine. Classes in the morning, lunch with her mother in the staff pantry, and afternoons dedicated to homework or small tasks that Jessica assigned her in the kitchen, always taking care that they were appropriate for her age. "She has a way with pasta," commented Michael one afternoon, observing how the girl helped stretch ravioli dough under Jessica's attentive supervision. Delicate, precise hands. She could be a chef in the future. The comment, coming from the temperamental chef who rarely complimented anyone, positively surprised Thomas. It was another confirmation that his decision had been correct. The transformation in Nancy was equally remarkable. Still thin, still with that look that carried memories of difficult times, but now she walked more upright, spoke with more confidence. Her hair, previously constantly tied in an awkward bun, now sported a simple but well-done cut. A gift from Megan, one of the waitresses who had skill with scissors and had grown close to her new colleague. "We need to celebrate your first month of work," suggested Thomas on a Friday, while checking the task list with Nancy. "How about a special dinner tomorrow? I can reserve a table for you two in the restaurant." Nancy seemed embarrassed by the suggestion. "In the dining room? I don't think it would be appropriate. We're employees." "Nonsense," he retorted firmly. "Several team members have dined here on special occasions. It's a benefit we offer to all employees once a year. You deserve it." Before she could protest again, Lily appeared, returning from school with bright eyes and a paper in hand. "I got the highest grade on my math test," she announced, proudly showing the exam with a large red A+ at the top. "That's wonderful, sweetheart," exclaimed Nancy, hugging her daughter enthusiastically. The simple gesture, a mother celebrating her daughter's school achievement, seemed to symbolize everything that had changed in their lives. "One more reason to celebrate," insisted Thomas, smiling at the girl. "What do you say, Lily? Would you like to try the famous pistachio ice cream that Chef Michael prepares only for special customers?" The child's eyes widened in expectation, and Nancy, unable to resist her daughter's excitement, finally agreed. "All right, but nothing too sophisticated, please. I don't want us to feel out of place." "Leave everything to me," assured Thomas, feeling a satisfaction he hadn't experienced in a long time. "It will be a special night." On Saturday night, Horizon Gourmet displayed its usual elegant weekend movement. The atmosphere was sophisticated but welcoming, with soft lighting highlighting the minimalist floral arrangements and carefully selected ambient music complementing the discreet buzz of conversations. Thomas had reserved a table in a quieter corner, away from curious gazes. When Nancy and Lily arrived, he was momentarily speechless. Both had clearly made an effort for the occasion. Nancy wore a simple navy blue dress, probably borrowed from Megan, he guessed, and had tied her hair in a more elaborate bun. Lily displayed a flowery dress that looked new, her hair carefully braided. "You both look beautiful," he sincerely complimented, leading them to the table. Nancy blushed slightly, unaccustomed to compliments, while Lily smiled openly, absorbing the atmosphere of the dining room with curious eyes. "It's so different seeing the restaurant from this side," commented the girl. Observing how the waiters gracefully circulated between tables, the night started wonderfully. Thomas had requested from Michael a special menu that combined sophistication with simplicity, including a child version for Lily. Adam, overcoming his initial resistance, served the table with the same deference he dedicated to the most important customers, even conspiratorially winking at Lily when he served her special juice in a crystal glass. Between one dish and another, the conversation flowed with surprising naturalness. Nancy, initially shy, gradually loosened up, sharing stories of her childhood in a small town in upstate New York. Lily talked animatedly about school, about new friends, about how the teacher had praised her drawings. Thomas found himself laughing more than he remembered laughing in years. There was something deeply comforting in that moment, as if he was finally filling a void he didn't even know existed in his meticulously organized life. It was when dessert was being served, the promised pistachio ice cream for Lily, accompanied by petit gâteau for the adults, that the perfect night was abruptly interrupted. A tall man, with broad shoulders and stubble, entered the restaurant with heavy steps. His eyes, slightly reddened, scanned the environment until they fixed on the table where they were. The aggressive posture and the way he completely ignored the maître d' who tried to approach him made it clear that he was not a regular customer. "Roger," murmured Nancy, visibly paling. Her hand instinctively sought Lily's, who had frozen with the ice cream spoon halfway to her mouth. Thomas immediately stood up, protectively positioning himself between the table and the man who approached. "So this is where you've been hiding, Nancy," vociferated Roger, his voice too loud for the refined environment, causing an instantaneous silence in the dining room. "Playing the lady while I've been looking for you everywhere?" "Sir, I'm going to have to ask you to lower your voice or leave," intervened Thomas firmly, maintaining a professional tone despite the evident tension. Roger completely ignored him, his eyes fixed on Nancy and Lily. "Almost 3 months without news. I had to hear from Celeste's mouth that you had found a job in a fancy restaurant. And now I find you here, all dressed up, eating fine food, while you told me you didn't have money even to buy milk for the girl." Nancy slowly stood up, her face a mask of dignity despite the visible tremor in her hands. "Roger, this is neither the place nor the time. If you want to talk, we can do it outside." "Talk?" He laughed sarcastically. "Now you want to talk? After running away with my daughter?" "Your daughter?" Nancy retorted, a spark of courage growing in her voice. "You barely remembered she existed in recent years. You only showed up to ask for money and cause problems." The tension was palpable in the environment. Customers at nearby tables observed the scene with evident discomfort, some beginning to discreetly stand up. Adam and 2 other waiters approached, ready to intervene if necessary. "Sir, I'm asking for the last time," insisted Thomas, his voice now carrying an authority he rarely displayed. "Leave peacefully or I'll be forced to call security." Roger finally turned his attention to Thomas, studying him with hostile eyes. "And who are you? Nancy's new boyfriend? Is that what you got with my absence? A man in a suit who pays for fancy dinner?" "I'm just the manager of this establishment," Thomas responded calmly, though he felt his blood boil at the insinuation. "And Mrs. Nancy is a respected employee of this house." "Employee?" repeated Roger with disdain. "So that's it. You gave her a job in exchange for what?" The crude insinuation was the last straw. Thomas stepped forward, completely abandoning his usual restraint. "I will not allow you to speak like that about a hard-working woman in the presence of her daughter. Leave now, or face consequences." The unspecified threat seemed only to fuel Roger's anger, who advanced threateningly. At that moment, however, a third voice was heard, calm, controlled, and laden with authority. "I believe you are committing several crimes at this moment: trespassing on private property, disturbing the peace, threatening, defamation." The list goes on. Everyone turned to the middle-aged man, impeccably dressed in an Italian suit, who had stood up from a nearby table. Alexander Morgan, one of the most respected attorneys in the city and a regular customer of the restaurant, observed the scene with the calm of someone accustomed to tense situations. "And who are you, old man?" challenged Roger, although his posture had faltered slightly. "Alexander Morgan, criminal defense attorney," he formally introduced himself, approaching with measured steps. "And it happens that I am a personal friend of Captain Reynolds, who would certainly love to pay you a visit if I call him right now." He removed his cell phone from his pocket, as if to emphasize the threat. "Furthermore," he continued with the same imperturbable calm, "I don't know if you're aware, but we have security cameras throughout this establishment. Your unauthorized entry and threatening behavior are being recorded at this exact moment. Quite concrete evidence for a potential criminal case." The mention of legal consequences finally seemed to penetrate Roger's anger. His gaze alternated between Nancy, who remained upright despite the visible trembling of her lips, Lily, who had shrunk in her chair with eyes wide with fear, and the lawyer who observed him with the quiet confidence of someone who knew exactly the power he held. "This isn't over," he finally muttered, stepping back a few paces. "I have rights over my daughter. I'll be back with the law on my side." "You'll be properly received when you do," responded Mr. Morgan smoothly. "Now, I suggest you leave before I really make that call." With a final, furious look in Nancy's direction, Roger spun on his heels and left with large steps, pushing a chair in his way and completely ignoring the maître d', who opened the door with evident relief. The silence that followed was broken by Lily, who finally let out a contained sob. Nancy immediately wrapped her in a protective hug, murmuring words of comfort while fighting against her own tears. "I apologize for the interruption," said Thomas, turning to the dining room where customers observed the scene with expressions varying between curiosity and discomfort. "Please, continue your dinner. The house offers a round of champagne for everyone as a way to compensate for the inconvenience." The generous offer, combined with the waiter's ability to quickly resume service as if nothing had happened, helped normalize the environment. Gradually, conversations restarted, though in lower tones and frequently punctuated by discreet looks in the direction of the table where Nancy was still hugging Lily. Mr. Morgan approached, the gentle expression contrasting with the firmness he had demonstrated moments before. "Mrs. Nancy, I don't believe we've been formally introduced. Alexander Morgan," he said, extending his hand. "I'm sorry that our first interaction had to be in such unpleasant circumstances." Nancy accepted the greeting with trembling hands. "Thank you for intervening, Mr. Morgan. I don't know what would have happened if—" "Don't think about that now," he gently interrupted. "The important thing is that you and your daughter are safe." He turned to Thomas, who still seemed slightly stunned by the turn of events. "Thomas, old friend, I believe you need a private moment. Perhaps the office would be more suitable?" "Yes, of course," Thomas agreed, recovering part of his professional composure. "Nancy, Lily, let's go to my office where we can talk with more privacy." As he led mother and daughter through the dining room, he felt the customers' gazes following them. Some showed sympathy, others mere curiosity. Few exhibited that veiled disapproval, suggesting that the status quo of the elegant restaurant had been disturbed beyond the acceptable. These latter, he noticed with some surprise, no longer bothered him as they would have in the past. His priorities had changed significantly in recent weeks. In the small office at the back, Lily finally allowed herself to cry openly, sobs shaking her small body, while Nancy hugged her, murmuring words of comfort. Thomas felt momentarily displaced, uncertain how to act in the face of such a raw demonstration of emotion. "Is he going to take me away?" asked Lily between sobs, her voice choked by fear. "I don't want to go with him, Mom. Please don't let him." "Nobody is going to take you anywhere, sweetheart," guaranteed Nancy, although her own tone betrayed uncertainty. "We're safe here." Thomas approached, kneeling to be at Lily's height. "Your mother is right, Lily. You are safe here. And we have friends who can help, like Mr. Morgan." As if invoked by his words, a light knock on the door announced the lawyer's arrival, who entered after Thomas's permission. "Pardon the intrusion," he said politely. "I just wanted to check if you need any additional assistance." Nancy raised her face, tears leaving visible trails in her careful makeup. "He'll come back, won't he? And next time?" "He'll come prepared." Mr. Morgan nodded gravely. "It's a possibility we should consider, yes. Men like your ex-companion rarely give up easily when they feel their authority has been publicly challenged." "What can we do?" asked Thomas, feeling simultaneously protective and powerless. "First, document what happened today," the lawyer promptly responded. "A police report recording the invasion and threats would be prudent. Second, perhaps it's time to formalize Lily's custody situation. If Mr. Roger does not have legally established custody, he has few rights to claim." "We never formalized anything," admitted Nancy, running her hand through her hair in a nervous gesture. "When we separated, it was informal. He simply left." "Then we have an initial advantage," concluded Mr. Morgan. "Mrs. Nancy, if you'll allow me, I'd like to legally represent you in this matter. Pro bono, naturally." "Pro bono?" "Without costs," he gently clarified. "Consider it a return for the excellent food and service I've received at this establishment for years." The offer surprised Nancy, who looked hesitantly at Thomas as if seeking confirmation that this was really happening. "Mr. Morgan is one of the most respected lawyers in the city," he assured. "If he's offering help, it would be sensible to accept." After a moment of reflection, Nancy nodded. "I deeply appreciate it, sir, but I don't want to be a burden to anyone. If you can just guide me on the procedures, I'll try to resolve them myself." The lawyer smiled, silently admiring the dignity of that woman who, even in such a vulnerable situation, refused to be treated as a passive victim. "Your independence is admirable, Mrs. Nancy. But sometimes, accepting help is the stronger path. Consider that with proper legal assistance, the process will be much faster and more efficient, ensuring Lily's safety more quickly. That argument, her daughter's safety, finally convinced Nancy. "In that case, I accept your offer, Mr. Morgan, and I promise that one day I'll repay you somehow." "I have no doubt about that," he replied with a gentle smile. "Now, I suggest we all rest. The day has been intense. Tomorrow we can meet to discuss the next steps." When the lawyer left, Thomas remained with Nancy and Lily for a few more moments. The silence between them was not uncomfortable, but laden with unverbalized meanings: concern, gratitude, a growing sense of connection that went far beyond the professional relationship. "I'm sorry about the ruined night," Nancy finally said, trying to recompose herself. "It was supposed to be a special celebration." "The night isn't ruined," Thomas replied softly. "It just took an unexpected turn. But the important thing is that we're all okay, and now we have a plan to move forward." His use of the first-person plural, "we're," did not go unnoticed by Nancy, who observed him with a new understanding in her gaze. "Thank you for everything, Thomas, for being by our side." "Always," he replied, surprising himself with the conviction in his own voice. In that moment, as he observed mother and daughter, Nancy trying to rebuild her shaken dignity, Lily gradually recovering her childish composure, Thomas understood that he had crossed an invisible line. He was no longer just the manager offering help to an employee in difficulties. He was someone deeply involved in the lives of those two people, someone who could no longer imagine his world without them. The Boston winter was beginning to show its first signs of farewell when Thomas was called to Benjamin Matthews' office. Almost 6 months had passed since the tumultuous night when Roger had invaded the restaurant, and much had changed since then. With Mr. Morgan's legal assistance, Nancy had managed to formalize exclusive custody of Lily. The process, which would normally be long and exhausting, was surprisingly quick, partly due to the lawyer's competence, partly because Roger, after a private conversation with Mr. Morgan, whose content was never revealed, simply disappeared from the city, apparently in search of opportunities on the California coast. Lily flourished at school, revealing herself to be a brilliant and creative student. Her drawings, increasingly elaborate, began to attract the attention of teachers, who suggested extra art classes to develop her natural talent. Thomas promptly offered to fund the classes, despite Nancy's initial protests, who gradually learned to accept help without interpreting it as charity. As for Nancy, her transformation was remarkable. From a hesitant and distrustful figure, she had become a confident woman, whose work was so exemplary that Benjamin frequently mentioned her as a model for other employees. Recently, she had started studying at night, a technical course in administration suggested by Thomas himself, who envisioned for her a future beyond cleaning tasks. "Sit down, Thomas," instructed Benjamin when he entered the office that morning at the end of winter. "We have important matters to discuss." Something in the owner's solemn expression caused slight discomfort in Thomas. During all those years working together, he had learned to recognize when something significant was coming. "Any problem, Mr. Benjamin?" he asked, sitting in the indicated chair. The owner smiled enigmatically, fingers intertwined on the imposing desk. "Problem? No problem. In fact, it might be the opposite." He paused as if carefully choosing his words. "Thomas, how long have you worked for me?" 13 years and 7 months approximately." "Almost 14 years, reflected Benjamin. "Time enough to know a person, don't you think? To understand their character, their capabilities, their limitations." Thomas nodded, uncertain about where that conversation would lead. "During all that time," continued the owner, "you've been the model of professionalism I've always demanded. Discreet, efficient, dedicated. Horizon Gourmet has become what it is today thanks, in large part, to your management." "Thank you, sir. I'm just doing my job." "No, Thomas. You do much more than that, and it took that little girl appearing at the back door for me to really see it." Benjamin leaned back in his chair, observing him attentively. "You know, I always thought there was something contained in you, as if you kept an essential part of yourself locked up tight." The observation, so precise, left Thomas momentarily speechless. "In recent months, however, I've witnessed a transformation," continued Benjamin. "You continue to be the exemplary manager, as always, but there's something different. A humanity that perhaps was always there, but that you didn't allow to show through." "I confess, I've gone through some personal reassessments," admitted Thomas, uncomfortable with the intimate direction of the conversation. "And that deeply satisfies me," smiled Benjamin, because it confirms what I already suspected. You're ready. Ready? For what exactly? In response, Benjamin opened a drawer and removed a folder of documents, placing it on the desk between them. I'm retiring, Thomas. 75 years are more than enough for a life of work. I want to dedicate my time to traveling with Martha, visiting places we've always postponed because of the restaurant, perhaps writing that culinary memoir book I've been promising for decades. The news, although not completely unexpected considering the owner's advanced age, still caught Thomas by surprise. I understand, sir. It will be a great loss for Horizon, but I completely understand your decision. When do you plan to announce your replacement? Benjamin smiled broadly, as if Thomas had just told a particularly funny joke. I just did. A few seconds passed before Thomas completely understood the implication of those words. Me? But I thought perhaps your son. Daniel. Benjamin laughed softly. My son is an excellent doctor and a wonderful man, but he has no interest in gastronomy or administration. He would be unhappy here, and the restaurant would suffer under his disinterested management. He pushed the folder toward Thomas. These are the documents for transfer of ownership, not of the entire establishment, naturally. I'm offering you a partnership, 40% initially, with an option for gradual increase as stipulated in the contract. Thomas opened the folder with slightly trembling hands, scanning the official documents with incredulous eyes. It was an extraordinarily generous offer, far beyond anything he could have imagined or aspired to. Mr. Benjamin, I don't know what to say. It's an immense honor, but you're wondering why I would do this, completed Benjamin understandingly. The answer is simple. You deserve it. And more importantly, Horizon deserves someone who loves it as much as I do, who understands that a restaurant is not just a business, but a living space where stories happen daily. He made a significant pause before continuing. Besides, there is one condition. Of course, Thomas promptly responded. Any condition you consider appropriate. I want Horizon to expand its social function. What you did for Nancy and Lily inspired me, made me remember my own story. The owner's eyes acquired a distant gleam, as if seeing something beyond the office walls. When I was 8 years old, my family went through extreme difficulties after my father fell ill. A local baker, Mr. Anthony, offered me work and eventually helped us in various ways. That gesture of generosity completely changed the course of my life. The revelation hit Thomas like lightning. The similarity to his own story was so extraordinary that for a moment he was speechless. I didn't know, he finally murmured. I've never shared this story with anyone besides Martha, confessed Benjamin. Perhaps out of pride, perhaps fearing it would seem like a story invented to inspire employees. But when I saw what was happening with you, Nancy and Lily, I knew it was time to reveal my own journey. He stood up, walking to the window that offered a partial view of the restaurant's main dining room, where the first preparations for lunch were already beginning. My condition is this. I want part of the space to be adapted for a social program that offers meals and opportunities for children in vulnerable situations. Not just charity, but education, training, dignity. He turned to face Thomas, who was still absorbing all that with an expression of astonishment. I believe you are the perfect person to lead this transformation. Someone who understands both worlds, that of scarcity and that of abundance. Someone who can maintain Horizon's excellence while expanding its mission. Thomas remained silent for a few moments, processing not only the extraordinary offer, but also the implicit trust in it. For years he had dedicated himself to the restaurant, placing it at the center of his solitary existence. Now, when he was finally beginning to build connections beyond those walls, he received the opportunity to unite these two aspects of his life. It would be an honor, Mr. Benjamin, he finally responded, his voice choked with contained emotion. And as for your condition, I don't see it as an imposition, but as a privilege, something I myself would like to propose if given the chance. The two men exchanged a look of deep understanding, the type of silent communication that only occurs between people who, despite differences in age and position, share fundamental values and similar formative experiences. Excellent, smiled Benjamin, extending his hand. I believe Horizon will be in excellent hands. As he returned to the dining room, after discussing the practical details of the transition that would occur in the coming weeks, Thomas felt simultaneously stunned and strangely calm. It was as if an invisible circle was closing, as if all the difficulties of his past finally revealed their greater purpose. As he passed through the kitchen, he saw Lily sitting on a small stool in the corner, concentrated on drawing something in her school notebook while waiting for the time to return to school after lunch. Nancy, a few meters away, supervised the cleaning of equipment, giving precise instructions to a new employee with the confidence of someone who completely dominated their environment. "Thomas!" exclaimed Lily upon seeing him, her face lighting up with that spontaneous smile that had become increasingly frequent in recent months. "Look what I drew!" He approached, observing the colorful drawing that she proudly displayed. It was a childish but surprisingly detailed representation of the restaurant. In the center, 3 figures holding hands, a woman, a girl, and a man in a suit, whom he presumed to be himself. "It's beautiful, Lily," he sincerely praised. "How you have a lot of talent." "It's for the school contest," she explained excitedly. "The theme is my favorite place." Those simple words hit him with unexpected force. For that child who had known instability and precariousness, the restaurant, or perhaps the people in it, had become a place of safety and belonging. "Thomas, did something happen?" asked Nancy, approaching upon noticing his emotional expression. "You seem different." He smiled, deciding to immediately share the news. "I just had a meeting with Mr. Benjamin. He's retiring and offered me a partnership in the restaurant." Nancy's eyes widened in genuine surprise. "That's wonderful. No one deserves it more than you. Congratulations." "Thank you," he replied, still processing the magnitude of the change that was approaching. "But there's more. He wants us to transform part of the space into a social program for children in vulnerable situations. Something that offers not just food, but also education, culture, opportunities." Nancy observed him for a few moments, a deep understanding in her gaze. "Like what you did for us," she said softly, "just on a larger scale." "Exactly. And I'd like you to actively participate in this project. In fact, I was thinking of proposing that you coordinate it once you complete your technical course." The offer clearly caught her by surprise. For a moment it seemed she would protest, say she wasn't qualified, that it was too much responsibility. But then something changed in her expression, a resolution and acceptance of her own worth and capability. "It would be an honor," she responded simply, "and I think I could do a good job. After all, I perfectly understand what these children need." Lily, who had listened to the conversation attentively, intervened with the characteristic objectivity of children. "So we're going to help other kids like me. I can teach them drawing." Thomas laughed, touched by the girl's spontaneous generosity. "Of course, Lily. We'll all have much to contribute." In that moment, looking at mother and daughter, so transformed compared to the fragile and distrustful figures he had met months ago, Thomas felt a deep certainty. Horizon Gourmet would continue to be a restaurant of excellence, a space of refined gastronomy and impeccable service, but it would also become something more, a turning point in the lives of people who, like himself, like Benjamin, like Nancy and Lily, needed just one opportunity to transform their trajectories. 1 year later, Horizon Gourmet Restaurant maintained its reputation as one of the best culinary establishments in Boston, but it had incorporated a new dimension to its existence. The side space, previously used only for occasional private events, had been completely renovated and transformed into New Horizons, a social program that daily served dozens of children and adolescents in vulnerable situations. In the morning, before the restaurant opened for lunch, the space served free breakfast. During the afternoon, it offered educational and cultural activities, from tutoring to basic culinary classes, arts, music, and computer skills. On weekends, it conducted professional workshops for young people and adults interested in the gastronomy and hospitality market. Nancy, now graduated from her technical course and attending a social work college program in the evening, coordinated the program with the same efficiency and dedication she had demonstrated in her previous functions. Her first-hand knowledge of the difficulties faced by the target audience made her approach especially effective and empathetic. Lily, about to turn 9, had become a sort of unofficial mascot of the project. In the afternoons after school, she led a small drawing workshop for younger children, displaying surprising patience for her age. Her own artistic talents continued to flourish, with her drawings frequently decorating the walls of both the social space and the main restaurant. As for Thomas, the transition from manager to partner owner had brought new challenges and responsibilities. but also a satisfaction he had never experienced before. The restaurant continued to thrive under his management, with the traditional clientele remaining loyal, while new patrons were attracted by the social dimension that now integrated the establishment's identity. On a particularly busy afternoon, while supervising preparations for a charity event that would take place that evening, Thomas received an unexpected visit. "Impressive what you've done with the place," commented Benjamin, observing the transformations with evident approval. He was tanned and visibly relaxed after months traveling with his wife. "You maintained the essence of Horizon, but added your own vision, exactly as I expected." "Thank you," replied Thomas, genuinely happy to see his mentor again. "We've tried to balance tradition and innovation. And from what I see, you've succeeded with great success. Martha and I have been following news about the social project. That National magazine article even came out." They walked together through the space, observing the preparations for that night's event, a charity dinner whose funds would be destined for the expansion of the program to other neighborhoods in the city. "You know what impresses me most?" commented Benjamin, stopping to observe a group of teenagers helping with decoration under Megan's supervision, the waitress who had become a regular volunteer in the project. "It's not just the impact on the children served, but the transformation in the restaurant team. They seem more engaged, more connected to something bigger than their specific functions." Thomas nodded, having observed the same phenomenon. Even Adam, initially the most resistant to changes, had become an enthusiast of the project, offering etiquette and table service classes to young people interested in pursuing a career in the area. "It was a collective transformation," he reflected, "as if we were all somehow rediscovering our purposes." At that moment, he spotted Nancy and Lily entering the hall, returning from a meeting at the school. There was a lightness in the way they walked, how they conversed, how they occupied the space, the security of those who finally found their place in the world. Upon seeing him, Lily ran in his direction, proudly holding a paper in her hand. "Thomas, I won first place at the science fair," she exclaimed, displaying the certificate decorated with a golden ribbon. "The teacher said my project on food waste was the best in the school." "That's wonderful, Lily," he congratulated, genuinely proud. "We have to celebrate. How about a special ice cream from Chef Michael after today's event?" While the girl excitedly celebrated, Nancy approached, respectfully greeting Benjamin before turning to Thomas. "That family we visited last week, the Wilsons, accepted our offer. The mother starts training in the kitchen on Monday, and the children will come to the program during their after-school hours." The news filled him with satisfaction. Each new family integrated into the project represented a victory against the cycle of vulnerability that he knew so well. "Excellent work, Nancy, as always." She smiled, that confident smile that had become her trademark in recent months, so different from the hesitant and fearful expression of the woman he had met a little over a year ago. "We're just beginning," she responded with serene determination. "There's much more to be done." Benjamin observed the interaction with a knowing smile, as if confirming to himself that he had made the right choice. When Nancy and Lily moved away to continue preparations, he turned to Thomas. "You know, when we decided to transform Horizon, I imagined we were expanding its mission, but now I see that actually we're returning to its origins, to our origins." Thomas nodded, understanding perfectly. The circle had closed, not only in his personal life, but in the very essence of that space that meant so much to him. "It's as if it had always been part of the plan," he reflected. "Each step, each choice, each challenge, everything brought us here." As he observed the movement around, the restaurant's traditional team working side by side with the project's young people, Nancy coordinating activities with natural confidence, Lily proudly displaying her certificate to Chef Michael, Thomas felt a fullness he had never imagined possible. The restaurant that previously served only the elite now also fed hopes, dreams, and possibilities. The table had been expanded, literally and figuratively, to accommodate more stories, more new beginnings, more transformations. And in this process of transforming lives, he himself had been deeply transformed. The meticulous manager who kept his past locked away had given way to a man who understood that his story was not a weakness to be hidden, but a strength to be shared, a living testimony that the cycle of scarcity could be broken, that new narratives could be written. "Horizon has always been more than a restaurant," said Benjamin, as if reading his thoughts. It has always been a space of possibilities. And it will continue to be, assured Thomas, as together they observed the future taking shape before them. A future that, like the best recipes, combined tradition and innovation, technique and heart, planning, and the essential seasoning of shared humanity.